The etymology of a word is a curious and fascinating thing. To study the history of something is to redefine what you know of it. It is to peel back the layers of time, revealing the humble and often mundane origins of names and titles. Originating from the long-forgotten and barely documented myths of pre-imperial Terra, the word apothecary in Old Europa meant storehouse or repository. Through linguistic drift, this turned into apothecarius, meaning store clerk, and eventually apothecary. This profession began with the humble curation of collecting and storing medicinal herbs and roots, yet over countless millennia, it evolved from basic botany into the sophisticated sciences of chemistry and pharmacology, all dedicated to preserving the fragile life of the common baseline human. It is something to wonder then, dearest listener, to see this title carried by the white-clad giants of our 41st millennia. The storehouse they now guard is not filled with dry herbs or healing salves, but with the genetic legacy of the Primarchs themselves. To the Astartes, the apothecary is the clerk of the dead, ensuring that, even in the total destruction of the body, the chapter's repository remains full. This transition from simple herbalist to the grim harvester of the battlefield was not born of mercy, but of a cold, calculated necessity to preserve the sanctity of his craft. And so I present my next penned work, the guardian of the chapters, the medics of the Angels of Death. The role of an apothecary within the ranks of the Astartes is one of preservation that transcends mere medicine. It is a holy stewardship of the Emperor's own design, a biological crusade that began in the cold silence of the gene labs during the pacification of Luna, circa 703 M30. The Legionnaires Astartes were a masterpiece of bioengineering, but they were also a resource of finite capacity until the compliance of the Selenar gene cults on the throwing world's only natural noon. These cults possessed a vast repository of genetic knowledge and material that allowed the Emperor to scale the production of his warriors from mere thousands to the hundreds of thousands that would eventually conquer the galaxy. It was from the merger of Terran military discipline and Selenar bioscience that the apothecary was born. These early apothecaries were not merely the combat medics. They were responsible for the biological stability of the legions as they pushed further and further away from the light of the throne world and into the mutagenic radiation of the void. During the long-lost and half-forgotten glory years of the Great Crusade, the apothecary served as the link between the Primarchs and their sons. They were the ones who translated the demigod physiology of their gene-sire into the transhuman bodies of the Astartes, supervising the implementation of the 19 specialised organs with precision and care. To continue though, dearest listener, one must first comprehend the miraculous and terrifying substance known colloquially amongst the Brotherhoods as gene seed. This term serves as a catch-all designation for the complex cells and microscopic viral machines that have been meticulously engineered to catalyse the transformation of the mundane human adolescent into a transhuman instrument of war. Every single strand of this biological legacy traces its origins back to the 30th millennium, born within the subterranean gene laboratories of the Emperor of Mankind himself. Deep beneath the Himalayasian mountains, the Master of Mankind and the biotechnical divisions utilised the singular genomes of the 20 Primarchs as a template, crafting a series of 19 distinct biological precursors that would eventually define the Adeptus Astartes. In practical application, the term gene seed most frequently refers to the precious contents of the progenoid glands. These glands an apothecary must harvest with surgical reverence to ensure the continuation of their legion and the modern-day chapters. There exists no relic more sacred than that of the progenoid glands. These twin vessels of the gene seed are the singular hope of the Astartes' continuation. These biological requirements, implanted within the throat and chest of every neophyte, wherein the very essence of a Primarch is cultivated and refined through the crucibles of war. It is a cold, surgical necessity, for as the warrior bleeds, these organs swell with the genetic blueprints required to forge the next generation of Astartes, absorbing the echoes of 1,000 battles into their cellular memory. When a battle brother finally falls, it is the somber duty of the apothecary to harvest the seed from the cording clay of the dead. This is the only way an Astartes may reproduce, with any and all physical and mental need for sex or relationships being purged from the adolescence, as such things is not needed from a machine of war. He is a father of a future who leaves no heirs of his own flesh. His only offspring is that of his gene father, a sacred legacy that uses the warrior's body merely as a vessel for the more divine architecture crafted by the hands of he who sits upon the Golden Throne. The methods of cultivation are as varied as the organs themselves. While some are painstakingly cultured in virtue within the nutrient vats of the apothecarian, others are injected directly into the aspirant's marrow, where they act as viral architects, hijacking the subject's own physiology and begin the process of building a new autonomy from within. This metamorphosis is an agonising ordeal of the highest order, particularly since many of the 19 implants are neural in nature. To ensure proper integration within the central nervous system, the subject must often remain fully conscious throughout the surgery, his mind unshielded by the mercy of painkillers as the apothecary weaves the Emperor's genius into his very being. Historically, the transition from mortal man to transhuman warrior has never been governed by a single, standardised liturgy of activation. Since the era of the first founding, 730 during the time of the Unification Wars, when the original 20 legions were formed throughout the highly experimental and often volatile methods, each lineage has developed its own esoteric rituals to govern this biological awakening. This ancient divergence has birthed a tapestry of martial traditions that persist to the present age, reflecting the unique temperaments of the Primarchs themselves. Regardless of the specific rites performed, the underlying mechanism remains the same. The gene seed serves as the master key that unlocks the latent metabolic potential of the human form. It is the apothecary who acts as the arbiter of this process, wielding the viral machines of the Emperor's own design to rebuild the subject according to a divine biological template. Without their constant vigilance, the mastery of the atom and Astartes, the transformation from man to myth, would collapse into a ruin of cancerous growth and genetic failure. The apothecary ensures that the fire ignited in the Himalayasian vaults so many millennia ago continues to burn within the veins of every battle brother who stands in defence of the throne. In the early days, they were often the most studious and temperate of their brethren, warriors who understood that the survival of the legion rested not on a single victory, but on the careful management of its genetic stock. The dark history of the Emperor's children is defined by such a disaster, a period of near extinction known as the gene seed blight. This infection acted with the virulence of an aggressive cancer, systematically destroying the entirety of the Third Legion's stored gene seed reserves and inflicting massive damage to those of the other legions. As their numbers plummeted towards total annihilation, the Legion found itself physically incapable of bolstering its own strength, trapped in a desperate cycle, but the only hope of reinforcements lay in the dwindling harvest of the Progenoid glands from their fallen. During this grim epoch, the future of the Phoenician sons hung by a single fraying thread of hope, held firmly in the hands of their apothecaries, who laboured tirelessly against the encroaching cellular decay that threatened to silence the Third Legion forever. This downward spiral towards oblivion was only truly halted upon the providential discovery of the Primarch Fulgrim on the resource-starved world of Chemos. His discovery providing the pure genetic template required to stabilise his lineage. This narrow escape from the abyss served as a chilling epiphany for all the legions, driving home the absolute reality that their collective survival was irrevocably tied to the sanctity and stability of their gene seed. Each legion began to develop its own unique traditions within the apothecarium, reflecting the distinct nature of their Primarch's blood. The apothecaries of the Ultramarines were known for their righteous record-keeping and logistical brilliance, ensuring that every gene seed extraction was catalogued with obsessive detail, while the apothecaries of the Vilcafenrica, the Space Wolves, the Wolf Priests, blended medical science and the shamanistic rituals of the Fenris homeworld, believing that the spirit of the wolf was as vital as the organs themselves. However, the seeds of heresy were often sown in the very laboratories meant to sustain life. In the Third Legion, the Emperor's children, the pursuit of perfection led Chief Apothecary Fabius to begin experiments that overstepped the Emperor's strict mandates. Fabius believed that the Astartes were merely a beginning, not an end, and his unauthorized enhancements to his brother's physiology began the long slide into madness. When the Horus Heresy finally erupted in 005 M31, the role of the apothecary was fractured along the lines of loyalty and betrayal. For the loyalists, the apothecary became a desperate symbol of preservation. They fought and died to shield the wounded and reclaim the progenoid glands of their brothers so that the Legion may live to fight another day. They became the scavengers of the dead, moving through the blood-soaked trenches to rob the Reaper of his prize, knowing that every gene seed lost was a victory for Horus. On the side of the traitors, the apothecaries descended into the depths of flesh crafting. No longer bound by the Emperor's edict or the moral constraints of the apothecarian, they began to use the gene seed as a currency for power. The apothecaries of the World Eaters started experimenting on that wretched device known as the Butcher's Nails, the cortical implants that drove their brothers into a state of perpetual rage, while the apothecaries of the Death Guard found themselves presiding over a nightmare of rot. They were forced to transition from healers to cosmic stenographers of decay. No longer did they treat wounds to close them, instead they meticulously catalogued the various blooming infections and necrotic blessings bestowed upon their brothers by the chaos entity known as Nurgle, gifts that defied every known law of biological science. The betrayal of the apothecaries was perhaps the most wounding of all, for they were the ones who turned the Emperor's most sacred gift, the gift of life, into a weapon of terror mutation. By the time of the Siege of Terra in 014 M31, the traitor apothecaries were less healers and more necro-alchemists, feeding the endless hunger of the warp with the corrupted remains of their former brethren. In the aftermath of the heresy, during the period known as the Reformation and the Great Scouring, a subject that will in due time have its own record, the High Lords of Terra and the Avenging Sun returned Tribute Guilliman realised that the power of the legions had to be broken to prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again. The Codex Astartes, codified circa 021 M31, completely reorganised the legions, and with it the role of the apothecary. By splitting the legions into smaller chapters, the role of the apothecary became ever more vital. In a chapter of only 1,000, every single battle brother is an irreplaceable asset, and the loss of even a handful of gene seeds can doom a chapter to a slow, agonising death through attrition. The Codex established the modern rank of the apothecary as a specialist officer, independent of the standard squad structure, reporting directly to the chief apothecary and the chapter master. This era also saw the establishment of the gene seed tithe, a mandatory requirement for every chapter to send 5% of its genetic material to Mars every century to be tested for purity by the Adeptus Mechanicus. The modern apothecary is clad in the clinical white of the ancient healers of Terran myth, yet he carries the weapons of a master executioner. He is a warrior scientist of the highest order, possessing a mind that is a living library of biochemical treatments, a vast and clinical repository where ancient Terran medical lore is stored. To the battle brothers of the Adeptus Astartes, he is the Angel of Mercy. His mercy is often delivered at the edge of his Narthecium. This device is the lifeblood of his office, a mechanical extension of his will that allows him to dispense potent combat stimulants to dull the agony of a shattered limb or perform instantaneous battlefield surgery amidst the fury of combat. Within the Narthecium lies the most important tool of all, the reductor. This is a specialised device of immense power, designed specifically to punch through the hardened ceramite-reinforced rib plates of a Space Marine to reach the aforementioned twinned progenoid glands. These glands are the biological equivalent of a chapter's soul. As mentioned, one is located in the neck and the other is in the chest, and they gather the genetic data of the other 19 organs throughout the Marine's life. When the apothecary kneels over a brother whose light is fading beyond the reach of science, his role shifts from the healer to the executioner. He offers the Emperor's peace, using the Carnifex, a spring-loaded, high-impact piston that brings a swift and merciful end to suffering. Then, with the reductor, he harvests their glands. To lose a battle brother is a tragedy felt by the whole chapter, but to lose his gene seed is to step towards the chapter's ultimate death. For a gene seed is irreplaceable. The apothecary carries these bloody canisters as a heavy holy inheritance, moving from corpse to corpse under the shadow of war, ensuring that even in the finality of death, the fallen warrior's legacy will seed the next generation. To the uninitiated, the apothecary of the Adeptus Astartes is primarily perceived as a figure on the battlefield, the white armoured spectre wielding his specialised Narthecium to reclaim the genetic legacies of the fallen amidst the harrowing spray of bolt of fire. As my extensive research within the formations and structure of the Astartes find, the true war of the chapter's continued survival is fought not in the mud of some distant war-torn world, but within the sterile and silent corridors of the chapter apothecarium. The apothecarium itself is a facility that is far more than a simple infirmary, existing as a sprawling complex of subterranean vaults or heavily fortified towers that serve as the sovereign domain of the chapter's elite medical units. Behind massive ferrocrate blast doors and under the ceaseless mechanical gaze of programmed gun servitors, these specialised warriors meticulously catalogue the chapter's entire genetic history while maintaining the absolute purity of the precious gene seed. Within these reinforced bastions, the apothecary conflicts continue in the lightless vaults where he transitions from the frontline medic into a cold, unblinking researcher and gatekeeper of the chapter's history. The process of forging a Space Marine is a decade-long ordeal of invasive surgery, intensive chemical conditioning, and deep-seated hypnotic suggestion, all of which fall under his absolute jurisdiction. From the initial trial of the aspirant to the final transformative implantation of the black carapace, the apothecary oversees every chronological step with clinical detachment. He must remain ever vigilant for the slightest hint of cellular mutation, organ rejection, or genetic drift. For even a single flawed biological component can lead an entire company into madness of physical corruption, or the enduring shame of a slow genetic rot of the entire chapter. Connected to the main apothecarium are the deep frozen catacombs, vast and frost-rimmed halls where the air is kept at biting chill to ensure optimal biological preservation. Thousands of sealed flasks are housed within these stasis-shrouded galleries, each one containing an extracted progenoid gland, Biscopia or neuroglottis, or another essential organ destined for a future hero of the Imperium. From this cold and silent store, the apothecaries labour to create new generations of the Adeptus Astartes through a process that demands the absolute apex of their scientific skill and surgical ability. Just as the mortal recruits are tested and broken through the grueling martial trials to ensure only the bravest candidate survives, so too must the gene seed itself be subjected to a punishing gauntlet of biological stresses. The apothecary orchestrates a lengthy series of trials for every harvested organ, subjecting each delicate sample to varying levels of intense radiation and aggressive chemical agents to observe how the transhuman tissues react under extreme duress. This scrutiny is a fundamental necessity, because even the smallest cellular flaw can potentially grow into a terrible and heretical mutation if it remains undetected by the watchful eyes of the medical staff. Furthermore, the complex process of melding a gene seed organ into a young recruit is made indefinitely more dangerous if there is any hidden irregularity held within the biological secrets of the sample. Such imperfections can cause the Space Marine organs to grow with a violent autonomy, fusing together unnaturally, or even bursting forth from the flesh of the subject in a display that results in a swift death if merciful, or a truly horrific semblance of life if not. Because of these ever-present risks, an apothecary remains an integral part of the warrior's life long after he has formally accepted into the Brotherhood. Every battle brother is monitored with clinical precision to ensure he does not develop any latent mutations and that his specialised glands remain in peak functional condition throughout his centuries of service. While the Space Marines are regularly examined by their medical overseers to confirm their continued purity, the results of these physical stresses remain a closely guarded secret, buried deep within the chapter's private records. For any discovered flaw in the genetic makeup is viewed as a profound weakness, or a fracture of the biological construction that could eventually lead the warrior towards the path of heresy and mental madness. Even a single minor mutation, should it escape the notice of the apothecarian, might cause the chapter's entire gene stock to degrade over subsequent generations, thereby polluting whole batches and spreading a silent taint through every rank of the organisation. Beyond internal maintenance, these specialists are also burdened with the aforementioned duty of preparing the essential gene seed tithe that all chapters are required to send to the Adeptus Terra and the Mechanicus of Mars for a high-level inspection. This vital sample is examined for its absolute purity before being stored away in the bolts of Mars to be used in the foundation of entirely new chapters. If the masters of the Imperium detect a small flaw or any sign of instability within this tithe, it can cast a dark shadow over the chapter's reputation and, in extreme cases of corruption, bring about a formal decree of excommunication despite there being no formal act of heresy. The cultural variations of the apothecary are as diverse as the chapters themselves. For the Iron Hands, the apothecary is the master of cybernetics, his role blurring with the pet marine as he replaces failing flesh with the blessed cold steel. They believe that flesh is weak, and the apothecary's duty is to purge that weakness. For the White Scars, he is a pneumatic healer who performs complex surgeries in the rushing bays of a rhino transport, matching the frantic pace of the hunt. And for the Blood Angels, the apothecary is the sanguinian priest, the figure who must manage the red thirst and the black rage that gnaw at their very DNA. The sanguinarian priest carries the blood of Sanguinius in a sacred chalice, using in rituals that are much spiritual as they are biological, acting as the bridge between the physical health of the brother and the tragic destiny of the Primarch's bloodline. Beyond their sacred role as the genetic guardians, apothecaries are masters of advanced transhuman surgery and the intricate craft of bioengineering, possessing the skills required to navigate the delicate intersection of flesh and artifice. When a Space Marine is grievously wounded on the field of honour and survives, his journey inevitably leads to the apothecary's surgical table, where the reconstruction of his superhuman form begins. To facilitate the restoration of failing organs or the mending of shattered limbs, the apothecarian maintains an extensive repository of the Battle Brother's own genetic material, secured within pressurised gene banks for this singular purpose. Utilising the unique bioseed of the individual warrior, the apothecary can cultivate replacement lungs, livers and hearts, or even grow vast sheets of lab-cloned skin to replace that which has been scorched by plasma or flayed away by the Xenos blade. Despite these miraculous biological feats, the apothecaries possess no natural means of regenerating entirely missing limbs, necessitating a collaborative effort with the chapter's tech marines to forge sophisticated cybernetic replacements. These bespoke augmentations are often designed specifically for the individual warrior, meticulously sutured into existing muscle groups and bolted directly into the skeletal structure to ensure a permanent load-bearing bond. This integration is a painstaking endeavour, when the apothecary must delicately weave the severed nerve endings with the monofilament receptor wires, allowing the bionic limbs to interpret and respond to the Space Marine's rapid neural impulses with near-perfect fidelity. Through these bionic eyes, limbs, organs, they can all be replaced, ensuring the warriors suffer no loss of combat efficiency. Indeed, the hardened steel casings and adamite components often grant a mechanical resilience that surpasses even the legendary toughness of the Astartes themselves. The life cycle of these augmentations often extend far beyond that of their original biological hosts, spanning centuries of continuous warfare and thousands of bloody engagements. When a battle brother finally falls in the service of the Emperor, the apothecaries reclaim this mechanical bounty with ritualistic precision. These sanctified devices are then meticulously refurbished and passed down to future generations of wounded warriors, becoming revered relics of the chapter's history, much like any ancient suit of power armour they inhabit. However, the luxury of a sanctified surgical suite is not always available, and during the rigours of an extended campaign, an apothecary is frequently forced to perform desperate repairs far from the technologies of the apothecarian. This battlefield surgery is characterised by a crude and frantic necessity, intended solely to return the Space Marine to the firing line with maximum haste. In such dire circumstances, bionics may be scavenged from the recently deceased while potent chemical stimulants are substituted for genuine biological healing. With roughly stitched meat and fused muscle hidden behind the protective ceramite plates of his armour, the warrior is sent back into the fray. A patchwork of original autonomy, salvaged iron, all held together by the Emperor's will and the apothecary's grim resolve. In the 41st millennia that we now reside in, the apothecary's role has expanded to meet the new horrors of the galaxy. He is the master of the chapter's chemical warfare, formulating special toxins to unmake the strange biologies of the intergalactic threat that is the Tyranids, or the resilient flesh of the fungal infection that is the Orcs. He studies the Xenos autonomy not out of a heretical curiosity, but find its most efficient killing point. He is now also the arbiter of the Rubicon Primaris. Since the return of Rabute Guilliman and the introduction of the Primaris Marines, by the extremely divisive Belarus Call at the turn of this millennia, the apothecary has been tasked with the most dangerous medical procedure in Imperial history, the transformation of the newly dubbed Firstborn to the new Primaris requires the implementation of 3 additional organs: the sinew coils, the Magnificent, and the Belarusian furnace. And all this involving a total biological overhaul that often results in the death of the subject. The apothecary must guide his brothers across this Rubicon, balancing the need of greater strength with the risk of total biological collapse. Ultimately, the apothecary is the servant of an ever-paradoxical and demanding necessity of the Adeptus Astartes. He believes in the divinity of the human form as refined by the Emperor, yet he spends his life mending its broken pieces and harvesting its remains from the dead. He stands as a silent, gore-slicked architect of the chapter's endurance, a soul who treads the carnal house of the front lines with the singular intention to snatch a divine future from the closing jaws of death. When the final tally of a crusade is written in the grand annals of the Imperium, it is recorded in the ink of the scribes. But it is made possible by the blood on the apothecarians' hands and the unyielding resolve of their hearts. He ensures that, as long as one heart beats and one gene seed remains in his custody, the legacy of his chapter will never truly die. Instead, it will continue to rise from the ashes of every lost world, born again from the flasks and incubators of the apothecarian, to serve the Golden Throne, and to do so until the Emperor's dream is finally realised, or until the stars themselves go out and are finally extinguished. Remember, dearest listeners, knowledge is power. Guard it well. This record may now be sealed in the Emperor's name. To appease the algorithmic machine spirit and ensure it recognises your service, register your credentials or preferred seal in the comments below and distribute this data shunt to fellow adepts. For those seeking deeper archives, visit patreon.com/Historitor Corvo More to keep this transmission array running and the sacred vellum fresh. The links, as ever, are in the details below. But, dearest listener, our work never ends. Your clearance has been extended to the next prioritised file, appearing on your Voxcast now. Proceed onwards, for our vigil continues, and I shall join you in the next one.